So there we go.
And also with you.
And also with you. we call that the Zoom Collect. So, so Amaury, tell us about your work.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be among some faces that I know and we have shared in ministry. Larry, Stephen, Victor, we've had the opportunity of doing ministry together in different spaces, you know, and I remember some of your favorites from times I visited Utica. So it's good to be back to Utica, even if virtually at this point. I am coming to you from Schenectady Community Ministries for the past, let me see, March, April, June. So for the past year and 3 months, I have been the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of Schenectady Community Ministries. And I'll give a little bit of a blurb around, you know, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, and some of the challenges ahead. Not only to introduce the work that we are doing here at SICM, which is the way that we know it here for short, but hopefully also to get us in some good conversation going. So what is it that we do and how do we do it here at Schenectady Community Ministries can be summarized in 4 major areas. One, Schenectady Community Ministries runs the largest food pantry in the Capital District of New York State. That means that our output in the pantry for 2021 was over 400,000 meals worth of groceries. That was given out to some 10,000 visits in that year. And half of those households that visited come to the pantry at least once a month. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go to some of the challenges ahead regarding the work that we're doing around food insecurity. We also run 2 acres of urban farmland in 3 of the poorest neighborhoods in the city of Schenectady. That urban farmland has 2 very important characteristics, which for me are important regarding the way we're moving as an organization, but also the impact it's having in our community. And one is that it is community-based. And what I mean by community-based is that this year-long farm operation in 2 acres of urban farmland is planned, executed, benefits, and coordinated with the communities where we are found. We're in 3 slots in 3 neighborhoods throughout the city. This urban farmland operation is also intercultural, right? The city of Schenectady is one of the most diverse communities in upstate New York, and that ethnic diversity is welcomed in the planning. We never want to presume in our farm work that we are teaching folks how to do this. We want to welcome folks' insight. And it is very interesting how when we engage the ethnic diversity that exists in the city of Schenectady, especially when we talk about food and farming, not only are products grown, right, they're much more diverse than what a lot of people expect they will find, but there's also a lot of ideas around farming practices, right? The reason we're an urban farm and not an urban garden, which is what a lot of us think when we're growing, you know, vegetables or fruits, is that the reason we went into doing honey beekeeping, into tending to egg-laying hens, and also curating rabbits in the work that we do, that turned us into a farm. But the reason those came to be was because of some of that ethnic diversity that exists and people wanting to bring to bear their cultural experience around farming into urban farming that also then allows for this operation to be truly intercultural. Related to that, it's also the religious diversity that exists. And I'll speak a little bit in a minute around the faith-based perspective that SICM brings. But as you bring intercultural practices, you also bring religious practices, and food is one of these very easy ways in which we can get quickly into having food conversations. For a lot of people, growing certain foods at a certain time, it's also part of a religious practice or in preparation of religious practice. It's also very interesting to see how a lot of that goes into the planning and execution of the farm plan for any given year. And the last thing I'll say about that intercultural engagement is that one of the things that our farm staff has been very intentional for the past 5 years, but especially during the pandemic, it has been engaging with indigenous communities, right? This space of Schenectady back before the coming of Europeans to this part of the world was a space of encounter between the Mohicans and the Mohawks, right? So it was a space of peace, right? These were two native nations that were often up and against each other in the regular political realm. But Schenectady became this space of peace because it also became a space of food production for both nations, right? So it's interesting that for millennia, if you think about it, this part of the world that has served as a breadbasket for many nations. And one of the things that we want to recuperate is that narrative, right? Regarding our engagement with the Mohawks. The Mohawks that were not living in this part, had not been living in this part of the world for well over 300 years, right? After the revolution triumph and the republic that was established, George Washington ordered the expulsion of the Mohawks out of this part of the world. It was about 10 years ago when the Mohawks, who were moved into what we now know as Quebec, have started to return to ancestral lands along what we know as the Mohawk River, including some areas in Schenectady. So this community-based intercultural urban farm work has also allowed us to begin having conversations around how the original caretakers of this part of the world that were taking care of it and how we might want to recuperate some of those original practices. And the third thing that we do is that we run the largest summer meals operation in Schenectady County. In the summer of 2021, we gave out upwards of 57,000 meals. We gave breakfast and lunches to children 18 years and younger throughout the city of Schenectady and in the immediate suburban area in over 30 sites. This meant that we were serving around 650 children a day over a 9-week period, right? And although those numbers seem great, and I think they are, we know that we are not scratching the surface. The city school district of Schenectady reports some 9,000 students in the student body. Around 70% of the student body get free or subsidized lunches, right? So as we're only serving 650 children a day throughout the summer period, we know we're not hitting every single child and young person that needs to have access to food, right? And when we go to the challenges in a minute, we'll talk a little bit how some of the things that were approved during COVID that were not renewed for this summer might affect the issue of access of food to some of our children and youth. Before we get there, let me talk a little bit about why we do this, right? We do this first and foremost, and I think this resonates with everybody in the call and who's going to be watching later, because we're a faith-based organization, right? Long story short, 55 years ago, a group of church leaders in Schenectady and of regional denominational leaders in the greater capital region, including what we now know as the Albany Presbytery, came together to figure out how they were going to bridge the gaps around the racial tensions that existed in the mid 60s, right? And the way they decided to do that originally was through housing, children, and elderly services, right? Eventually, Schenectady Inner City Ministry, which is our corporate name, we were doing business as Schenectady Community Ministries, was founded. Some 25 years ago, we decided to add food to what we do, right? And so one of the stories that I tell people is that, me being here a little bit over a year, succeeding a 33-year tenure from my previous, from my predecessor, who since passed. One of the questions that I never got to ask my predecessor was, why food? And the reason I'm trying to pursue the answer to that question is that all of a sudden we became the largest food pantry in the Capital District, adding summer meals, adding and now an urban farm at the most recently. How was it that we ended up with food, right? And again, some of that begins to be answered because we're faith-based. Recently, just before I came here, we also embraced an interfaith identity, right? So although we were organized by mostly Protestant Christian organizations, now we have within our membership Roman Catholics and also evangelical Christian communities, but we also have Jewish, pagan, and Sikh communities that are part of our organization, and we have very good working relationships with several Muslim communities in Schenectady and the greater capital region, right? So we're expanding this understanding around how food gathers us for the sake of wellness of a lot of people, and beginning to translate, which is one of the responsibilities that I'm taking on new. How is it that each one of our faith traditions compels us to do this work? And how is it that each one of our faith traditions speak of food, right, as an integral part of our faith practices, but also of our ability to reach out to the community? We're also committed, of course, and related to our faith traditions, to addressing poverty, right? And the way we address poverty is squarely through the intersection of food access, right? Jesus said in the Gospels that we will always have the poor. And I think it's really nice when some of us who do this kind of work, they hear often from some of the people that we work with, oh, we should be working ourselves out of business, right? And I understand why people say that, right? But now being in this work after 17 years of ordained ministry, I am now beginning to understand what was it that Jesus meant, that by you will always have the among you, right? There are systemic realities that are set in place to put down and make it difficult for people to get out of certain social and economic circumstances, and we need to address both the immediate repercussions of that, but also address the social and policy significance of that. So poverty is pervasive in Schenectady City, in Schenectady County, and certainly all throughout upstate New York, right? Food access is only one of the points of intersection around poverty, right? And the understanding that anyone facing food issues, right, food access issues, will be facing one or more of this and other intersections, right? They'll have issues with ability to learn. This is especially true to children, right? It's been proven that when children don't have appropriate nutrition, they will not be able to fully perform in the school. Similar thing with adults around work. If you don't have a good nutrition, you're not going to be able to produce and perform well at work. You will more often than not have an issue of housing, right? And you will clearly have an issue with your healthy outcomes. And again, all the ways that once one of those get hit, the repercussions and how it affects your own life, but also the life of your family and the life of your community, right? Schenectady Community Ministries has been, again, for the past 25 years, committed to address the food access issue regarding that spectrum. And one of the new things that we're doing is seeking to very intentionally collaborate with other organizations that do other forms of social engagement and social service and social justice work, to make sure that we are coordinating in the work, so that we are not isolated doing this work, but understand that we're all in the poverty spectrum and that we all have something to add for the well-being of the individuals that we serve, that will have an immediate impact on the people, on the communities, so that it's not only us helping individuals or households, but actually working for community development. So when we think of community development, right, we're seeking to think now more holistically, right? And moving from the simple concept of wraparound services, right? Whereas you're here in the pantry and we'll have a couple of organizations being able to provide some other services for you, to let's actually coordinate together. And once somebody goes to our community action program to secure housing, they know they can come here for food. And once they're here, they know women, for instance, will know that they'll be able to go to the YWCA to get some sort of guidance around domestic violence, right? Which are all, again, intersections through this line of poverty. So challenges ahead that I want to place for before us and for our conversation. One of the reasons I am glad that Larry is hosting these conversations is that for people like me, it is good for me to share what is it that we do and why is it that we do it. But I always like to hear some feedback about what is it that people are hearing when I do our little spiel of what we do. So in order to engage some conversation around that, and I also look forward to hearing how some of you might be seeing this in the greater Utica area, right? Three big challenges that are ahead of us that I think is important for us to keep in mind for us as Schenectady Community Ministries, and hopefully for you as you may be engaging with similar organizations and figuring out how your congregations can better support. some of that work. So the first one is more cultural and policy based, right? And it's this idea that food pantries are emergency food programs, right? This concept of emergency food program is a government blanket statement for organizations that do food pantries or soup kitchens or that kind of more immediate community-based and grassroots engagement around food insecurity. The issue for me regarding dubbing organizations like ours as emergency food services is that it perpetuates a misconception, and that is that these programs exist for when an individual or a family are in a particular circumstance, they can have some sort of immediate support because they will get out fairly quickly out of the circumstance they're trying to solve, right? That's what emergency food services were created to be. However, if you heard some of the numbers that we were sharing, more than half of the people that we serve come back at least once a month, right? One of the things that we're trying to talk both in county government and in the state legislature is to begin changing that narrative. If more than half of the people that I'm serving are coming back for services at least once a month, I am their main source of food, right? There's also this disconnect between operations like ours, who are able to give, our operation here at the pantry is that we give 15 meals worth of food for everybody in the household, however you are reporting that. And we give that up to 2 times a month, right? Every other week, we're able to do that. If people are coming once a month, right, we are their main source of food. Another disconnect that exists is on the supplemental nutritional programs that exist at the federal and state level. A lot of the people, and maybe you have some of those in your congregations, who are beneficiaries of SNAP or WIC or other state or federal nutrition program, count on those fundings as their main source of food. And often there is no connection between those resources that they're receiving in cash for food and other forms of assistance that they might get. So one of my dreams, right, is that if we're able to convince the powers that be that food pantries are not emergency food services, right, but the consistent source of food for a lot of families, what would it look like for community organizations to partner with other community organizations, including faith communities, right, in educating folks, right, and say, come to the pantry, you'll be able to get 15 meals worth of groceries for everybody in your household, right, as a basic staple, if you will, right? And then let me encourage you to use your supplemental benefits for what they were meant to be, a supplement, right, for food assistance, right? And then also on a third leg, let me also connect you to other services around housing or education or otherwise, right? The reason we're trying to figure out, how do we do this here at Schenectady Community Ministries, but with other organizations, is if a parent, right, single or coupled, right, if him or her or they are able to not to worry about food, because they'll know they'll be able to come to, say, to Schenectady Community Ministries and get 50 meals at the worth of food every other week. Think about it, what kind of brain space and what kind of wallet space will that free for that family, right? It is sad and difficult to, in the 21st century, in the state of New York, to know that people are still making choices any given Friday when they receive their paycheck, whether to pay for rent or to pay for utilities or to pay for food, right? When the resources exist for people to be able to secure one of those concerns and then be able to address the others, right, with what they have. Part of that begins with understanding food pantries in general and Schenectady communities in particular, not as an emergency food program, but as a consistent source of food for thousands of households in the city of Schenectady and the county of Schenectady. The second concern, and this is a concern that I'm sure I share with each one of you, especially those, I think everybody here in one way or another, is the chief executive of a faith community, whether it's a regional community like Larry or a local community like most of you on this call, is the consequences of inflation, the war, in Eastern Europe and the pandemic, right? If the pandemic wasn't already a strain in our resources, money and otherwise, inflation seems to be gearing up to be much more long-term than any one of us would want it to be. Up to that, the war in Eastern Europe and how that continues to disrupt the economy and other supply chains, right? It's going to be a real issue. That has already affected our ability in the pantry to acquire food, right? Whereas we were able to buy fresh chicken at around $2 a pound, right? And give it out of our pantry. The fresh chicken that we're able to acquire, when we're able to acquire, is well over $5 a pound at this point. Right? And I mentioned chicken, right? It would seem basic to most of us in this call, but it is also the basic and most sought out protein by the folks that we serve, right? The alternative that we are getting, right, through the food bank and other sources for a cheaper way of doing this is breaded pre-cooked chicken, right? And I mentioned that as a challenge because one of the things that pantries like Schenectady Community Ministries and other food pantries throughout the state have been seeking to do because of new funding that came to Nourish New York during the pandemic is that we were able to significantly increase the quality and nutritional value of the food that we were giving out. All of a sudden, chicken has more than doubled its price, and it might not even be available, right? So how does that affect our ability to provide families in need with good, high quality, nutritious, and culturally relevant food, right? And that's a consequence of inflation, war, and the pandemic. And a similar thing is happening with summer meals, right? Not only our ability to procure good food for the summer meals program itself, but for the 2 summers of the early part of the pandemic, waivers were approved that summer meal providers did not have to serve food at a set time, which is usually the way it used to be, and that we were able to serve at the same time pre-bagged to children and youth throughout the city and county of Schenectady, a set of breakfast and a set of lunch, right? So you would come to the truck that pulled up into your neighborhood, and you were able to get the lunch for that day and the breakfast for the next day, right? So we were giving out the 2 meals at the same time, and that facilitated access, and that increased not only our engagement, but it also increased our output, right? This year, those waivers were not approved, right? So now we're going to have to go back to in-person congregates, which that already has all sorts of concerns that we are planning for and concerned about, right? But we're not able to give 2 meals at the same time, right? How that is going to affect the ability of our children to be able to access food. And the third challenge that I want, and I'll finish with this, that I want to leave to you is fair employment and fair hiring, right? As I was coming in, I was coming into the second summer of the pandemic, and one of the things that we quickly discovered is that during the pandemic, Sickham's pantry never closed, right? And we were able to do that because although we lost our volunteer base, of course, because of the pandemic, our staff, whether they were pantry staff or otherwise, came together and figured out how we were going to keep that pantry open. That also demonstrated for us that a lot of our pantry staff who are part-time actually deserved to stay full-time because of the amount of work in the pantry, but also the amount of outreach they were able to do during the pandemic that began to inform how we procure food, what food should we be procuring, and how quickly we needed to pivot, especially around religious and cultural celebrations, right? For many of us, and you might be the choir as I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. For many of us, we face this concept that staff is overhead, right? When in fact, for those of us who are engaged in ministry, whether it's with the purpose of sharing the good news of Christ to folks, or with the purpose of adding up to the ability for communities to do better as a community and for families to engage in wellness and well-being, it takes people, right? And how do we continue to staff and continue to give staff in a fair way, in a way that allows them also to have a good, fulfilling, and an engaging life is one of the challenges that we are facing, especially in a time when there are more jobs out there than there are people seeking jobs, right? And part of that is that post-pandemic, people seem to be moving to seek other forms of quality around the work that they do, and also around the engagement in personal life and in family life. How do we make sure that we have that very in front of us, right? Because in fact, those of us who are doing grassroots work, and this is true for us as Schenectady Community Ministries, and to each of you who are doing a parish ministry, it's hard work, right? When we talk about the church being the hands and feet of Christ, we're not talking about a philosophical reality, literally, right? We need hands and we need legs and feet in some shape or another to get out there. So how do we staff that appropriately is one of those challenges. I thank you for your time, and I'm really looking forward to the exchange with you at this moment. Thank you, Larry, for having me here.
That was really rich, and I think you've called to our attention things that we need to either know or need to remember. So thank you. How is there an organization similar to yours in our area that you know about?
I don't know, and that's actually a very good question. Let me answer it in the Capital District side of that. When I learned at the fairly early in my tenure that we were giving out, over 10,000 visits, 400,000 meals worth of food, the first thing that I did was, start searching in the Capital District who is operating at our level, and truly, there's nobody remotely close to what we are doing. And when I said that, I never got to ask my predecessor why food and how we got here, right? One of the reasons is, how is it that an organization that is relatively small, serving the second smallest county in the state, right? Schenectady County, that is, became this big food pantry operation, right? And I still don't have a clear answer for that. What I do have is this idea that the cooperation that existed among member faith communities that conform the corporation of Schenectady Community Ministries clearly facilitated also cooperation in making this work, right? So instead of individual churches doing small pantries all over the city or the county, people seem to come together and say, let's make this work as one place and we'll support it, right? I think there's a model there, right, around cooperation and coordination that faith communities throughout the state need to explore, right? I have found, well, and I knew this even when we were in the city, because I know Larry and I, had this conversation, a gazillion times, right? How often is it that presbytery leaders or synod leaders, go to any one congregation or to one presbytery and talk to people, and they're having the same conversation, right? In this town and in this town over, and in this city over, and this county on the other side, but they're not talking to each other, right? So one of my jobs when I was in the synod, and this continues, I know, to be one of Larry's passions, right? It's literally going around and hearing these stories and connecting people. You need to be talking to this other person because they're talking about the same thing, right? And if you come together, right? I saw it in my 7-year tenure in the synod. I'm seeing it here in Schenectady Community Ministries, and I know this to be truth, right? The energy of connecting people who are passionate around an issue or an opportunity in witness or community engagement, right, is so rich. The connection alone, right, that allows for some of these things to happen, seemingly by chance, right? But there's a lot of relational work that needs to happen, right? So to your question, Larry, I don't know that this that an operation our size exists in Utica. I'm certain that there has to be food pantries, but more importantly, if that is something that begins to even tickle your imagination, what would food access work look like in any one of the towns that are represented in this call, engaging with the church down the street, or with the mosque on the other side of town, or with the synagogue somewhere a block away. We'll lead you further down that discernment road that maybe we think. It's just a
Larry,
matter
if
of
you
getting
would-
started.
Larry, if you would like, I can give you an overview of food ministries in Utica. You're muted, Larry.
Since you're sitting on two of them, please go ahead.
Well, there are a number. There are food pantries throughout the city, all coordinated through the Central New York Food Bank, and they each have their own geographic catchment areas. One of the churches I serve has a food pantry that serves 75 people or families a month, and those families look to the food pantry as either a primary source of food or a secondary source of food. In South Utica and probably across the line into New Hartford, there's Seeds of Hope. Their food pantry is at First Presbyterian Church, but is supported by several Christian congregations, and perhaps the Jewish synagogue might be a participant in that. There also is a Meals on Wheels kind of program, Our Neighbor's Meals, started by Carol Grove, former owner of the Bagel Grove. First Presbyterian participates in that, as do a number of congregations in the city and in the suburban areas, New Hartford and Clinton and perhaps Whitesboro. There are also a number of daily feeding programs that are faith-based. There's Mother Mary Ann's Kitchen on the west side. There's Hope House, which is in Cornhill. There's the Rescue Mission. So that's just a quick overview of some of what I know is going on in Utica.
What is your primary source of funding?
For the pantry, the health department, the HIPNAP at the contract through the health department is the main source of food for emergency food programs, right? So when you think specifically pantries and soup kitchens, programs like Meals on Wheels, right? They're all funded at the state level from the health department. During the pandemic, the Governor Cuomo, for one year, unveiled Nourish New York, and Governor Hochul made it law. That has added significant funding to acquire food, and the health department contract has very specific guidelines of the kind of food and the amount of food that can be given through that program. Nourish New York, on the other hand, was more flexible funding for acquiring food, but it allowed organizations like ours to partner more closely geographically with food producers and food growers, right? The purpose originally of Nourish New York was to be able to provide food growers and food producers a more immediate local outlet for foods that was getting wasted because of the whole shutdown that existed. We are projecting, should the Governor Hochul prevail in the election, we will have at least 4 more years of Nourish New York. So it's been really interesting to see our funding almost double through Nourish New York, but also our ability to have more close contact, right, with growers and producers. Literally, we're able to be in the pantry and point out, oh, this tomato sauce is produced in Rotterdam by a 3rd generation at the family operation, right? Or this basket of produce is coming, just a couple of hours away from Schoharie, right? Not from God knows where that the USDA sent it to, God knows where, kind of situation. Summer Meals is funded through the State Department of Ed But that summer meals program, but the funding that the State Department of Ed gets is actually USDA money, right? So although the State Ed Department is fairly directive and supportive of the work that we are doing, a lot of the regulations come from the federal government, right? So that adds up a whole layer of difficulties, right? Especially around the waivers, right? And the waivers needed to be approved by Congress. They have not been approved, right? So that's how all that happens. Our urban farms are more locally supported. We have 3 member faith communities who are very generously supporting that. We are using CDBG grants, community block grants through the city of Schenectady to support that. It's interesting because tonight I have a meeting with my board around the 2022-23 budget. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about is that the deficit that we're projecting in next year's budget, a lot of it is in the farms, right? Meaning our commitment to keep that very community-based and community engaging program going, but we don't have a more consistent source of funding. So for the next year or two, one of our challenges is sustainability overall throughout the organization, but of the farms particularly. Yeah, so those are our major sources of funds for us.
Awesome. Just one more quick question. So how do you also provide the spiritual nourishment?
That's a very good question, and especially as we have recently moved from being a Christian organization to being an interfaith organization. Mm-hmm. And my response to that is, I'll say one answer in summer meals and one answer in our farms. So although we're a faith-based organization, we don't proselytize, right? So that's something to keep in mind, because that is not our role. However, we have found it that more often than not, while engaging with children in summer meals, one of the things that we do is give out books, right? And we have this. A lot of our volunteers are church folk, right, throughout the city and county, right? Last year, some of you may remember that the Presbyterian Publishing Company sent out an email. I want to say they sent that email in June or July, saying for any church that's interested in a set of children's books. They were made available for free in English, Spanish, and Korean for anybody that would have them, right? We are not a Presbyterian organization, so I couldn't go to a publishing company, but I have a couple of Presbyterian churches that are members of SICM. So I emailed one of the pastors, if you can get me 500 books in any language of the ones mentioned, I'll be able to give them out.
Okay, awesome.
Not only were we able to give out very well produced and curated children's books around religious and ethical education. I mean, the Presbyterian Publishing Company is a phenomenal organization, right? Beautifully made, intercultural in the images that we're able to provide. The kids were coming back the next day asking for more books. 500 books were handed out within a week.
Wow.
Right? Because these kids were not only asking for them, they were feeding back to the volunteers what they were reading the books. Right, and we knew they were doing that. Right, on the farm side, one of the things that we do is tend to these animals that we tend, small livestock, and also grow vegetables and fruit. We also grow herbs and flowers. Right, of course, herbs and flowers for many of us have medicinal uses. Right, and for many traditions, including ours, that they may have even some religious significance. The urban farm manager is a former director of religious education with the Unitarian Universalist Society, and she did that for 10 years. She'll come back to every manager's meeting and say, I was a religious educator for 10 years. I have had more religious conversations around the morality, ethics of community engagement in the farms than I ever had working for a congregation, right? So one of the things that we're beginning to figure out is how do we open safe spaces, right? For folks to be able to come and have those conversations, moral and ethical conversations around belonging, conversations around community building, and us as Schenectady Community Ministry to begin seeing our faith-based identity as a strength in community engagement, not something that we need to hide, right? Because we're getting government money, right? Which is often what people think, if you're getting government money, you cannot be speaking about Jesus, right? That's not completely true, right? There are ways in which we can say, I do this, right? Because I am compelled by to do it, right? And I'm not asking you to accept it in order to get services, but let's be honest with each other, right? Why do I do things? Why do you do things? And then let's find each other, right? Whether you're a Christian or not, in figuring out this common moral and ethical compass that truly exists in any tradition that seeks to do good and to do community building, right? It's been really interesting exploring that with the staff, and I look forward in the next years to exploring how we're going to be able to facilitate that throughout the community. Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Thanks for all you do.
I have friends that would remark, that'll preach. So,
Preach.
all right. Well, Maury, thanks so much. I wanted you here just because you're my friend. I haven't seen you in a while.
So let's make the hangout a more personal hangout. The Utica is not that far away. And I mean, absolutely, let's do that. And truly, thank you. We're a small city. We're a small county. One of my big surprises has been that a lot of people in Schenectady feel a little bit left out. I'm like, no, we're doing phenomenal work, and we have a lot to share. So thank you for sharing, and thank you, like I said, and thank you for the feedback. It is important for organizations like ours to also know how is it that a story is being heard. So if you have any questions or comments after this, ed@sicm.us is my email. ed@sicm.us, or call Larry, and he'll find that email for you. And I'm happy to answer more questions. But truly, thank you for this opportunity to be with you. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maury, is there a prayer or a blessing that's been meaningful to you lately in this work that you could share with us as we leave?
Yes, and I hope this is new to Larry, although he may know it. I was a Boy Scout in a previous generation of mine, and I had the opportunity to go to Philmont Scout Ranch. Those of you who are who know scouting, is the big scout camp in New Mexico, in the northern part of New Mexico. Every time we walked into the mess hall, there was a prayer that we needed to learn. And I said it so many times that even as a native Spanish speaker, I was surprised that I learned it in English, but it's been in my mind. And let me share that as a blessing for all of you. For food, for raiment, for life, for opportunity, for friendship and fellowship, we thank thee, O Lord. Amen.
Amen.
And thank you, brother.
All right.
All right,
Thank you
friends.
so much.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Also with you.
Bye now.
Okay.